Hi, everyone. I thought I would take time to introduce myself to you because I've been hanging around here and I don't think you know much about me. And I called on a friend of mine who runs a really great podcast called the ADHD-ish Podcast, Diann Wingert. She's talented, which you'll see, and she's going to interview me today.
Are you ready?
Yes, ready.
Okay. Um, what made you decide to focus specifically on young girls with ADHD?
I guess it was a process because we had an organization called the Inattentive ADHD Coalition, and the board was deciding that we actually thought all children should be screened for ADHD by age 7. Actually, I wish we could be screened at birth, but we figured age 7 is when um, children are in school, they're in a structured situation, they're getting observed by more than just the family, so there's a lot more information for the physicians. So that age, and also boys on average with ADHD are diagnosed by age 7, so I thought girls should be diagnosed by that age too.
Logical, right? So
Yeah.
why is, and you've spoken a little bit about this, but the age of 8 is such an important goal for you because it closes the gender gap, but it
Well,
probably does a
beyond
lot
that,
of other things too.
well, I guess a few things besides, that's a good time to get more information, but also the younger we get children, the less damage that has happened to their self esteem, to their self confidence. What happens too is, I've been told by Kathleen Nadeau, the earlier you pick them up, the less likelihood they are to have developed the co occurring anxiety, the co occurring depression, the perfectionism, the masking. Even though we know bright children start masking as young as 3, what happens? We think that by 7 they're not that adept at it. So we might be able to sort it out a little bit more easily. And actually, because we've learned this is such a big issue, that girls learn to mask, and the masking makes it harder to recognize some of their symptoms. We have now written an article that we'll be sharing soon. It's actually something where I don't know, really proud of, I guess, because it's an in depth article to understand masking and to help parents tease it out in their daughters. So, all those reasons are why we think early diagnosis is better. We also know that the neuroplasticity of the brain, the younger you have it, the more you can prune your brain, grow new sections. And so, if you grow up practicing new habits, new behaviors that make you function better as a person with ADHD, it'll make the whole rest of your life easier.
To your point, Cynthia, I've never met a grown woman who got identified with ADHD as an adult who didn't start thinking at a very early age, there's something wrong with me. And unchecked over years, that becomes a potent negative force in a girl's life. So I'm sure that you can think back in your own life. I can think back in my own life to signs of my own ADHD that
Yes.
parents, teachers, and pretty much everybody, including therapists, missed. Either checking them off as, oh, that's just her personality, or she's immature, or she's anxious, or she's just not trying hard enough.
Well, I think that there's been such a cultural thing to think that ADHD is a boy's condition. And so people, maybe their brains weren't open enough to be considering ADHD. And the other thing is often with girls that we present differently. And
Mhm.
so if you're thinking it's always the high energy, hyperactive child, girls, even if they have the tendency to be that way, and I think you're high energy, is that we've learned to suppress it, so people still aren't thinking about it. And if they thought you were high energy, they aren't thinking that it's ADHD. So, yeah, those are problems. And that's where creating the awareness of how it presents in girls and how it presents in young girls is what's really motivating us.
And I'm sorry to say, as a former psychotherapist of many years, the vast majority of my colleagues would not have been able to accurately identify unidentified ADHD in an adult woman, because she would have developed an anxiety disorder, a depressive disorder, an eating disorder, and they would have just looked at that and not looked beneath that to the ADHD that was always there. So you've created a really, really important program for helping people who identify with this cause join forces with you. Can we talk about that?
Are you talking about the ADHD Advocates for Girls
I
already?
am. I am.
All right. Well, I want people to know, if you think I'm young looking, that I'm actually 83 years old, and Find the ADHD Girls exists because of my volunteer work and a hired um, administrative assistant in the Philippines. That is what Find the ADHD Girls is. And so I am so happy that we created this group called ADHD Advocates for Girls, where women, many who were late diagnosed, are joining and saying, we care about your message. We care that the next generation gets diagnosed before age 8. So we're going to help you. We're going to help disperse your message. We're going to share your checklist. We're going to share your content. We're going to be out there in our own communities or online telling other people girls have ADHD and we don't want them missed. So, yes, that's where I'm feeling like, well, I'm not going to live forever. And if I have these other women that take on this mission, and they're women that have that can do attitude, that nothing can stop us, and that we've waited 30 years since ADHD was known. And where are we? Are we still missing the girls? Yes, we are. So, do we want more generations to be like us, saying, I'm 50. Why am I finding out about this now? So if you feel that you don't want it to happen to the next generation of girls, the current generation growing up, this is where you can come and join us and make a difference. And every day, we started just on April 7th, and we already have 230 women from many countries of the world who have signed up to be advocates. We have a program. You get weekly emails that tell you exactly what you can do. But if you're not the kind of person that likes structure, we just say, well, go do your own thing. Draw on our materials and do what works for you. And we also say, do what you can when you can. So it's a no guilt program. If this is something that you care about and you think occasionally you can be out in your community carrying literature to people, that's advocacy. That's what we want.
You mentioned a checklist. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Well, we created a checklist online, and it's also available as a PDF. But the reason now that we wanted to be confident in our checklist, that there are rating scales out there, and psychologists won't, they poo-poo a checklist saying, well, what about rating scales? It hasn't been proven. So our checklist, when we shared it with Dr. Stephen Ferrone, who's like one of the most well-known researchers in ADHD, he said, until we have it proven that it is not, I don't know what the word is. Oh, finding false positives. That it's not finding too many people that don't have ADHD.
Okay.
We can't really say that it's valid. But he said that as an awareness instrument, it is a very valuable and an important contribution. And so, because our checklist takes about 10 minutes to complete, and it's describing the behaviors that you would see in a girl who's typically has ADHD. It's describing all those behaviors. That is the awareness piece. And what we're finding, that parents that complete the checklist, 87% of them say they're going to take some action. And half of them say, I'm going to talk with my pediatrician, or I'm going to schedule an evaluation. The others are saying, I'm going to learn more. I'm going to talk with my school. I'm going to talk share this information with others. And then the remaining 13% say, I'm not sure, or they've learned that they're comfortable saying their daughter doesn't have it at this point in time. So our checklist is a very effective awareness issue. And then it's up to the parents, once they're aware, to decide what they want as a next step.
It's one of the interesting things about ADHD, and this has gone on for decades. I studied ADHD in children and speculate, and this was in the early 90s when I was in graduate school at UCLA. At that time, everyone believed, and this was what was stated in the DSM, that this was a condition that affected about 4% of young boys, and they outgrew it by late adolescence or early adulthood. And my observation from dealing with the fathers of these boys when I was in training was, I'm pretty sure they don't outgrow it. And
Yeah.
that was just a few decades ago. So we weren't even talking about ADHD in adults in the 90s, much less
No.
girls or women. So there's this is such a huge gender gap. And I think it might be helpful to talk a little bit more about why girls present differently beyond the masking, like, because boys tend to be identified not by their parents, but by their teachers, because their more hyperactive, impulsive behavior in the classroom tends to disrupt what the teacher's doing. While girls may be quietly underachieving, not causing anybody any trouble, but just as impaired as the boys in a different way.
Well, and maybe we do teachers a disservice if we think they only care about running a well-controlled classroom. I think they probably are concerned about the well-being of their children that are in their classroom. That it's not great for that child who's always in trouble at school. So the motivation isn't just to keep the class under control. And I think we know that if we educated the teachers that it's harmful for these girls who sit there and look out the window, who aren't trouble in your classroom, but who are quietly not paying attention, who are having messy desks, who aren't turning in their work, who aren't showing their ability. If we get the teachers to be aware that that too is a problem, I think they will be on board with helping parents to recognize it in their children. In fact, Dr. Hallowell, his oldest daughter had the inattentive type of ADHD, and he didn't recognize it. It was the teacher who pointed it out to him. So sometimes, parents, we just love our children the way they are. And I remember when I had to, with my middle son, when I heard that he was in gym class, studying the lights in the ceiling and not paying attention, I didn't want him to have to give that up. That aspect of just being a delightful, different child. And yet, in the long range, that's harmful to him to not be someone who can focus at the right moments.
That's an interesting story, because I think sometimes we as parents are okay with our kids being a little different, with our kids being a little special, with our kids being a little unique, and not recognizing it as a potential sign or symptom of an actual disorder. And I think oftentimes that bias comes from not just love and acceptance and approval, but because many parents of ADHD kids have unidentified ADHD themselves, right?
Yeah, well, and I interviewed people, adults, who said, we didn't know it was unusual. It was just the way our whole family functioned. They fit right in because everyone was talking over everyone else. They were interrupting everyone else, getting into their activities and ignoring people around them. So it was normal in their home. So that's where sometimes teachers can help too, because they can see a broad range of behavior and know when it's off the bell curve, when it's not like it is with other children. Now, we know children with ADHD typically develop more slowly. Maybe they're 2 or 3 years immature. And some of that can account for why they could appear off the bell curve in a classroom.
Mm.
We actually started one child a year late to school. I think that can make a difference sometimes if you recognize this in your children. Um, maybe make some accommodations right at the start. But yeah, the I forgot. I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. It's that the teachers have the opportunity to see a wide range of behavior in students, but if they are characterizing what they observe as this kid is just immature, or they're unmotivated or disinterested, or you
Yes.
know, and
Well,
instead of
how they perceive it, and what we say is that to see ADHD in girls is not usually like one outstanding characteristic. It's putting together three or four things, and then that's what our awareness checklist does. It may put you can put together all these disparate behaviors and start saying, well, no, this is part of a complex, a cluster of traits, and it's describing ADHD. So that's what we want the teachers to start tweaking. It's not just one thing. It's not just that she looks out the window. It's not just that she doesn't remember to do the back side of a sheet. It's not that she has a messy desk or that she's always losing her possessions. It's all of those things together that makes me start thinking this might be ADHD.
And I think some of the myths and misunderstandings that we hear so much about that contribute to the delayed diagnosis of girls is, oh, you've heard these things a million times just like I have. Oh, everybody has that. That's not something special. Or, oh, I have a little bit of that from time to time. And what people need to understand is all of these behaviors, the procrastination, the perfectionism, the people pleasing, the time blindness, the disorganization, the inability to do anything unless we find it particularly interesting at that moment. Probably everybody has these traits or tendencies from time to time. The difference is that folks with actual diagnosable ADHD, girls, women, boys, and men, have
Yeah.
them much more of the time and to a much greater degree, right?
Yeah, so what I've learned to say to people, if they say, well, I have a little bit of it, I say, well, then you could understand what it would be like to have a lot of it.
Ooh, that's good.
Yes, and so what I have heard from a psychiatrist who helps adults with ADHD, he said what often happens is parents and pediatricians, when a child is younger, thinks that it's not that big a deal. So what if they're not doing that great in school, whatever, that they don't see the long-term impact of not diagnosing early. And of course, diagnosis at any age is helpful, but the earlier, the less there is less damage, I would say, the less harm there is to the self talk and the delayed, um, uh, what do you mean, fulfillment of yourself. The delayed fulfillment of yourself would happen. And so when I interviewed women, they would say, well, I wanted to be a doctor, but without knowing about my ADHD, I decided to become a veterinarian. So they lower their goals because they see that they don't understand why they're not performing up to their ability. They feel like they have ability, but they're not performing up to that level. And so they lower their goals, they lower their aspirations. We
Mm.
don't want that happening to girls. We want girls to feel like whatever they whatever their dreams are, they have the ability to make them come true.
And we know that there has been published research on girls and confidence where girls before puberty tend to think that they can do whatever they want. And oftentimes their parents are giving them that message. Honey, you can be whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. Whatever you put your mind to, you can achieve. But the confidence gap starts to widen around puberty because girls start paying attention to boys and what boys think about them. And if a girl has ADHD, she already has a confidence gap in herself. So she's going to be affected by that even more.
Hmm. Hmm. I don't have anything to say about that. It's just a sad story.
Well, and we've both met and worked with and interacted with, and we're going to talk about your book in a second, done research on all the negative effects of delayed diagnosis on women. Finding out that you have ADHD in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, or beyond has become far too common. And if
Hmm.
we took, the matter of ADHD in girls as seriously as we take it in boys and just normalized early assessment so that it's equitable and fair, the number of lives that can be changed is off the charts. It is far too common that girls and women tend to be identified late and boys tend to be identified early. There's enough information out there and a growing number of ADHD advocates for girls whose voices combined can change the future for folks like us. So I'm sure that's one of the main reasons that compelled you to write a book. How does it connect with the mission of the organization, Find the ADHD Girls?
Uh, well, basically changed my mind about ADHD and other neurodivergent conditions. A long time ago, there was Tom Hartman wrote a book about the hunter and the farmer's
Yes.
work.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to joke about it. But I woke up one day and felt like there's really some validity to this,
Mm.
that many ADHD traits would have done, and so much about that earlier, simpler world was a better world for people with ADHD.
Mm.
And I thought it's a better world for a lot of people with neurodivergent conditions. So my book is exploring and explaining why the hunter ecosystem was a better fit for neurodivergent people, and how in the farmer urban industrial ecosystem we are under more friction, and what we can do to live in this modern world and function better, but also the way forward so the modern world becomes a human centered ecosystem. I know it's
Mm.
deep, but there's ways that our world that we have right now is not a good fit for neurodivergent people, and it's not a good fit for generalists. It's not a good fit for the people that are just neurotypical, because we see people struggling. We see people having more mental health issues,
Yes.
more physical issues, and that comes back to an environment that's not great for us. And I, I'm not I think in some ways Robert Kennedy, the health guy, not not about vaccines, not about, but his thing about processed foods and the all the man-made products we expose ourselves to, when we've had a 300,000 year history of not being adapted to these things, and all of
Mm.
us within the last 300 years, there are all these changes. So that's what's my book about. But it's the way it will be related to Find the ADHD Girls is that if it gets published and I earn money, that money will benefit
Mm.
Find the ADHD Girls.
It has an ambitious message, mission, and goal. But
Mhm.
have you ever heard the expression canary in the coal mine?
Yes.
I remember hearing that in my very first lecture in grad school in the 90s. And essentially, I think that neurodivergent individuals are the canaries in the coal mine because we are more neurologically sensitive to our
Right.
environment.
Right.
Most of us, all of our lives have heard, oh, you're so sensitive. Yes, I am. And what affects us in a profound way will eventually affect them all, but we are the ones who notice it first.
Right.
And I don't think that is a deficit. I think that is a foreshadowing of what we should all be paying attention to. So I will definitely be reading and sharing the book when it comes out.
Well, good, Diann. Thank you. My goal is to make it attractive so people will want to read it because, it's a little heavy in theory.
Some of us like that kind of stuff. And if you end up putting it in an audio version, then you can get more folks with ADHD to read it. But since the book is not finished yet, and folks with ADHD and folks who care about people with ADHD want to know what to do now, what would you ask people to do after listening to this interview and wanting to take the next step for them, whoever they are?
Well, I guess two things. If you're involved with young children, get to know our checklist because that is our awareness tool to make you aware of what kind of behaviors to be watching for. And as I said, it's not just one thing. Get familiar with all those behaviors, and as you see them in children, be ready to mention to people, mention to parents, have you considered this? And you could hand them the checklist. So that's what I would first encourage people to do that are involved with young children, is to become aware of what ADHD looks like in young girls. So we don't want to miss them and keep missing them. And the other thing is for any adult who cares enough and wants to give 5 minutes a week to helping spread awareness, then become an ADHD advocate. We call ourselves AGs, AAG, and ADHD Advocates for Girls. And just go to our website, FINDtheADHDgirls.org / for the checklist / advocates for signing up as an advocate. And I'll be watching for you.
And to be clear, you don't have to have ADHD to be an advocate. You just have to care about those who do.
Yeah, you can be an ally.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you, Diann.
Thank you.
We believe all girls with ADHD should get a fair start in life by getting diagnosed by age 8. Visit us at www.findtheadhdgirls.org. Thank you.